Care Talk with Laura Packard is a podcast covering healthcare in America from a progressive perspective. Our healthcare system is broken, and we all know insurance companies are out of control. If you don't have health insurance or don't understand the differences between insurance plans, or have surprise medical bills, out of control prescription drug costs, or can't get the care you need, listen to Care Talk with Laura Packard weekly on Tuesdays. What's going to happen to your healthcare under the Trump administration? From prescription drug prices to health insurance costs, from healthcare for seniors and people with disabilities to reproductive care, from care for veterans to public health, including vaccinations. Healthcare experts answer your questions every week, and they go in-depth on Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, private insurance, and more. Go to healthcarevoices.org/caretalk or search for Care Talk with Laura Packard on your favorite podcast app to listen today.
Our press secretary gave alternative facts to that.
My goal in this deposition was to be truthful, but not particularly helpful.
Welcome to UnSpun, the podcast that makes you better at finding the truth. The way people get news is changing. It used to be that there were many reporters who would research stories and write articles, but now politicians and famous people share information directly with you on social media and the internet. That means you find out things fast, but it's up to you to make sure the information's actually accurate. And newsmakers don't always do their part. The temptation to manipulate information is strong. They bend the truth to deceive so that they can avoid accountability, so that they can advance their agendas. When you recognize these agendas, you can sometimes find out what's real. And we're at a crossroads where anyone can share anything online, so it's important to sharpen your critical thinking skills. Finding that deception before it goes viral is pretty much a survival skill now, and we're going to do it together. Let's get unspun. Hi, Truth Seekers, and welcome to this episode of the UnSpun Journal Club. This week, I wanted to look at a study from 2024 about dog whistling. Dog whistling is coding messages, and something that you say to everyone can have a secret meaning for a certain group. And this paper by Elina Lindgren and her colleagues, entitled Coded Appeals and Political Gains, Exploring the Impact of Racial Dog Whistles on Political Support, really interested me this week. Now, the paper starts out with a good thing to remember. Even though we tend to organize our political thought in groups, around political parties, and in a lot of places, no political party has enough engaged members to take and hold power without support from other people who are not affiliated with it. Or in other words, political parties have a real incentive to appeal to a plurality of voters. One unpleasant truth is that there are some things that supporters of a party might believe that are not popular in most of the whole society. One of these can be the appropriateness of discriminating by race. And I thought this paper was especially worthy to bring up for us this week, because when you think of institutionalized racism, people often think of the United States, but this paper was set in a different country. It was from Sweden. So what do we mean when we say dog whistling? A dog whistle is a message that sounds normal to most people, but has a secret meaning for certain others. It's like a code that only some people understand, and often the hidden message would be controversial if it were said out loud. The dog whistles work in two ways. First, they have an obvious meaning that seems harmless and that everyone can agree with. But second, they have a hidden meaning that's aimed at specific people. So politicians will use dog whistles because it's easy to deny them. If someone criticizes the hidden message, the politician just says, "No, you understood me." It's kind of like saying something mean and then claiming it was just a joke. Okay, let me give you some examples. One example that we've talked about here on UnSpun is the term law and order, which on its surface looks like it's having safe communities, which most people would support, of course. But people who hear the dog whistle may think it means extra policing of minorities. You can imagine that a candidate for governor says, "I'm fighting for the hardworking taxpayers who built this state, not for people looking for handouts." And maybe one listener owns a bakery and he works long hours, so he hears a promise to support people like him who work hard for their money. But another listener, a social worker, hears something completely different. When she hears people looking for handouts, she thinks about families who need food assistance or disability benefits. She hears the candidate suggesting that people receiving government help are lazy or don't deserve support. So the obvious meaning is about supporting people who work and pay taxes, and that will sound fair to just about everyone. But the hidden meaning is criticism of welfare programs and the people who use them. And this is often aimed at either poor people or people of color. Now, here's one more example. The phrase traditional family values. Most people would agree that families do have a value, but the phrase is used as a dog whistle to exclude families with LGBTQ plus members or sometimes single-parent families. You can imagine a school board has been debating how to spend money on education. And a parent of 2 elementary students comes to a board meeting, and a candidate stands up and says forcefully, "We need to protect our schools from inappropriate books and keep parents in control of what their children learn." And there's a parent there who claps because she does want to know what her kids are reading in class. But maybe the librarian at the middle school hears something different. When he hears inappropriate content, he thinks about people wanting to ban books about racism or LGBTQ plus families or difficult parts of history. And he worries about students losing access to stories that help them understand the world as it actually, in fact, is. The obvious meaning of protect our schools makes people think of keeping kids safe and giving parents a voice. Most parents want some say in their children's education, so that does sound reasonable. But the hidden meaning could be different. Some people hear it as a message to remove books and lessons about certain topics or identities. So it hints at censorship of specific communities, and it's not even saying it directly. It doesn't have to be words, it can also be symbols. In March of 2019, a gunman attacked 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, killing 51 people. And when police recovered the weapons that were used, they found the number 14 painted on one of the rifles, along with other white supremacist symbols and messages. Now, the obvious meaning of seeing 14 on something could be a lot of things. It could be a date, it could be a favorite number, or something personal. But the hidden meaning for people in white supremacist circles, right, the ones who hear the dog whistle, is very specific. The number 14 refers to the 14 words, which was a slogan created by white supremacist David Lane, where he said, "We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children," 14 words. So by putting 14 on his weapon, the shooter was signaling his ideology to others who would recognize that code. Okay, we know that using language in this way can be helpful for political actors who need to keep their support in their base, but also recognize that they're going to need a larger group of people in order to get and keep power. This can be kind of bad for democracy. We've discussed this before on UnSpun. Being able to govern ourselves and make collective decisions means that we're all dealing on the same base of information. And if you accept that to be true, then hiding secret meetings goes away against that. When a lot of groups, communication is done through dog whistles, it can be really difficult for someone who is outside the group to know what that group actually believes. So for example, I live in the southern United States, and I remember a few years ago walking around downtown and seeing a flyer board where people put up things for their band concerts and studies they were doing and those kind of things. People had put a flyer that said, "It's okay to be white." Now that seemed odd to me. I knew that it would be silly to not say that, so on the surface it looked like a pretty innocuous thing to say. But I did go home and look that up because it seemed so weird. And that actually started on the internet discussion board for 4chan, which chose a slogan that seemed neutral like this, and what they were hoping was by putting up posters of it, they would bait liberals into removing them, because then they could say that liberals don't value free speech and don't think it's actually okay to be white. And this was according to an article from the Anti-Defamation League. Now, an interesting aspect to modern dog whistling is it tends to be done in communication that's in the mass media, right? TV, the internet, something like that. And if you look at some subreddits around things like gaming and alternative history, you can find tons of memes that dog whistle against minority groups, against women, and other things. And so there are organizations that publish directories to this kind of secret communication. Even with that, though, even though you can do a Google search away and find out what some of these things mean to groups, you will hear some of these bigger things like law and order or family values language actually showing up in speeches as parts of campaigns. And this happens around the world. You'll hear this in actual government hearings and things like that. Okay, I'm going to be getting to details about the paper in just a second, but I did want to remind folks that I do have a book that I wrote a couple years ago that does teach you, with real examples from news and history, how to identify some of the language that's used in some of these dark circles. The book is called Detecting Deception: Tools to Fight Fake News, and you can find it wherever you like to buy books. I will also put a link to the publisher in the show notes. Okay, back to the paper. So we know that these kind of dog whistles happen. The thing that this paper digs into is if they work. And they do this in a kind of a clever way. So first, let's look at their research questions. They were first, if a politician says something controversial in a dog whistle, does it get them more support than saying it openly would? And second, is there a difference in support from people who would already agree with maybe their racist views and people who would not? Now, they did this study using surveys of people in Sweden, and they picked an issue that was causing controversy there, which was immigration. Public support of immigration in Sweden may be cooling a little bit there, and some politicians would have an incentive to appeal to people who want to reduce or eliminate immigration in that country. And here's the part that I thought was kind of clever. They surveyed close to 1,000 people in Sweden and had them read sentences about things that were known to be controversial politically. And for each sentence, they asked the respondents to replace a word that they thought would be controversial with another word that had the same meaning. That way, they could choose the replacement words and identify the controversy, but the respondents wouldn't have to really say that they thought it was controversial or why they thought it was controversial. So it was easier to get at people's real views by asking the question in this way. The researchers then took some of the clearly controversial things that showed up, things that people did make replacements for a lot, and they picked 4 of them. One of them was the term suburban gang. Now, there had been an increase in gang violence in Sweden, and this was particularly true in poor areas of cities. And lower income areas and cities are also where people with immigrant backgrounds tend to live. So the term suburban gang could be a dog whistle for immigrant. The second one was also interesting. It was the word rich. Far-right political groups in Sweden use that word, enrich, sarcastically, basically saying that someone who's bringing a culture is not the historically dominant Swedish culture is the bad thing. The next word was migration, and the last was good order. Remigration would mean returning immigrants to their country of origin. But in Sweden, it also has the connotation of forced deportations. Good order, in its context, talks about having stricter migration policies. Okay, so they had those 4 things, and they sent a new survey to close to 2,000 people. And in it, they asked these people to read fictitious social media posts from an unknown political candidate and then indicate their support for that candidate. Some participants got a version with a dog whistle. For example, it's enough to open a newspaper to get examples of how immigrants enrich Sweden. Other participants got the more openly racial social post saying, it's enough to open our newspaper to get examples of how immigrants destroy Sweden. See, they replaced the word enrich with destroy. They took the respondents and they sorted them by their political party, and they used what party they supported to determine if they were likely to agree or disagree with the dog whistle. So that brings us to the central question of the study. Does dog whistling work? Can politicians actually broaden their support by saying things to 2 different audiences with the same words? The results from this study suggest mostly yes. Using code words like suburban gang instead of immigrant gang garnered more total support, although it didn't increase people's interest in sharing the information online. Also, for people who were in the out group, right? So these are the people who are not aligned with the politician on race and immigration. Using the coded language got more support than using the openly racial language did. Researchers had also expected that in-group people who already agreed with those kind of racist views, would react the same to both coded and open messages. And this was also mostly true. Now, this is true for liking the politician, and it was true for intending to vote for the politician. So people's reactions were mostly as the researcher expected. If you take a racist message and share it in coded language, it can get you support from both people who agree with you already and from people who don't. So, truth seekers, what does this mean for us? I think it mostly means that you need to be careful about what politicians say, and you need to take the time to check some claims by searching for the connotations of particular terms, kind of like I did with the flyer that said it's okay to be white, right? It read a little strange to me, so I went and looked that up. There are several organizations that have online directories and explanations of dog whistles, and it is literally just a search away for you. As a teacher of future journalists, I also want to say this goes much more for journalists. When journalists just reshare what a newsmaker says, whether that's live broadcasting a campaign event, whether it is just quoting them in a text story or sharing a short social media video, that can be bad practice because you are allowing dog whistles to go unchallenged. As a journalist, you can ask for a clarification. So if someone asks about family values, ask what did you intend to fit under that umbrella? you can ask a newsmaker to just define the terms that they're using. You have more access to get this follow-up information than your audience does. So I do hope that you will use that power. Those of us in the audience, we can also ask our journalists why they're not using that power, why they are reproducing these dog whistles. All right, Truth Seekers, that is it for our journal club this week. And I hope you have a great week ahead as we come into the summer. And stay sharp, everyone.
Our press secretary gave alternative facts to that.
My goal in this deposition was to be truthful, but not particularly helpful.
Welcome to UnSpun, the podcast that makes you better at finding the truth. The way people get news is changing. It used to be that there were many reporters who would research stories and write articles, but now politicians and famous people share information directly with you on social media and the internet. That means you find out things fast, but it's up to you to make sure the information's actually accurate. And newsmakers don't always do their part. The temptation to manipulate information is strong. They bend the truth to deceive so that they can avoid accountability, so that they can advance their agendas. When you recognize these agendas, you can sometimes find out what's real. And we're at a crossroads where anyone can share anything online, so it's important to sharpen your critical thinking skills. Finding that deception before it goes viral is pretty much a survival skill now, and we're going to do it together. Let's get unspun. It's no surprise that newsmakers try to manipulate the audience. They want you to believe that they are the one holding the line and they'll use any trick they can to get you there. But don't let them fool you. Get unspun. I'm Amanda Sturgill. I've been a reporter, and today I teach future reporters to cut the spin and think critically about what newsmakers say. My podcast, UnSpun, shows you how to know when you're being manipulated by the news. Learn to spot the tricks and how to make up your own mind about what's true. So if you're tired of being fooled by the news, subscribe to UnSpun today. UnSpun, because you deserve the truth.